You're still tuned into the Power Station Energy 100 on Econojet. Let's talk business with Mr. Daniel Steinman, hosted by myself, Elsabeth Miani. We have been talking about the national budget that will be tabled on the 23rd of February 2023. We've been touching on the GDP. We have been slightly talking about, national accounts, but we can't shy away from debt management.
Yes, no, you're right. We can't, Now, it's very important that we put debt management in proper perspective. And I need to explain a little bit. It's not really pure mathematics and it's not pure statistics. It's the interface between the two. And you have to have an understanding that the nominal value of the total sovereign debt, we call it sovereign debt, meaning the debt of the government, and that excludes the private sector debt and the private sector, the big companies that also list bonds, and it excludes your debt and my debt, retail debt or at consumer level. So it's a macroeconomic function of running a country. Now I know immediately now we're losing listeners because now it starts getting too technical. But let me make it practical as always. The reason why I carried so much about the 200 billion GDP is because the debt of the country is expressed in relation to the size of the whole economy. Now, you must chew on that thing a little bit. The debt of the government is expressed as a percentage of the whole economy. That's why we talk about total government debt as a percentage of GDP. Does that make sense, Elsabe?
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure it does make sense to the listeners
now
as well.
200 billion gives us a very nice, easy example, a workable figure. If the debt goes to 75%, as we expect it will, it means it's 75 plus 75. First 100 billion, second 100 billion. 75% of that, 75 plus 75, it's 150 billion. That's a ballpark figure. It's more or less in line. The debt, I think, currently is about 146 billion total nominal value. So what you must understand from my very rudimentary example is that 75% of 200 is 150, and we are just shy of that. We are approaching that. If the debt continues to grow at the pace that it has grown, at the end of 2023 we will be beyond the 75% point. But that is only if the economy stays the same size. And here's the dynamic. If the growth in debt is constant, but the growth in the economy is expressed as in mathematics as a delta value. Can you remember I've given you a whole lecture in the past on delta values, meaning the change in value. Then it means the GDP is growing faster than the debt. And what is the magic? The magic is the percentage comes down. Because if the GDP actually grows to, let's say just a figure, 220 billion, and the debt hovers in the region of about 150 billion, you see now that one value has stayed the same, 150, but the other one has become bigger. Now the 150 is a smaller percentage of 220 billion than what it is of 200 billion. Does that make sense?
It does.
So the whole strategy with the budget and with the government's policies and making the economy grow is that the economy must grow faster than the debt. So immediately from that you see, I'm very realistic about what we need, the funding we need to develop Namibia, to finance the country. That's more or less a set figure, and it grows at a set pace.
Okay.
And it's published every year with a budget. Yes, the deficit will be 4% of GDP, or it will be, sometimes it is expressed, or in certain cases it is expressed as a percentage of GDP, but in other cases it's expressed as a percentage of total expenditure. In other words, what the government is going to spend. And the two are not the same. So there's obviously a relationship between them, but they are different values. So what you see now is that it becomes very important that we grow the economy, especially now that is there's also a lot of inflation, and that we sort of steadied the debt. The debt is not going to go away. We are going to pay this debt for years and years and years, but we need that money to function. And the whole trick is to make the GDP side grow faster, because then the ratio comes down. The percentage gets smaller. Now, this is where you need to get your mind around it. The debt actually gets bigger, slowly, but the percentage gets smaller. And that is what we want to see. We don't want to see deficits of 6% and 7%. We want to see deficits of 4% and then eventually, long term, maximum of about 2.5%.
So, Mr. Daniel Steinman, before we say goodbye, in regards to the debt management, and as an economist, do you think that Namibia is maintaining its debt well enough for the country to be safe economically?
Yes, no, definitely. If you look at the academic literature, the danger zone is when you start approaching 90%, because then you use most of your resources to pay interest and not to invest in the economy. Then the interest payment starts eating up the growth potential of the economy. And there's a very clever economist. He's actually a professor at Harvard in the USA, Kenneth Rogoff. And Kenneth Rogoff, his surname sounds a bit hard and harsh for us. I think the Americans would say Rogoff. He's of Russian descent.
Okay.
But as sharp as a blade.
Okay.
And he and one of the IMF economists, Carmen Reinhardt, they did all the research about 10 years ago. And they came up with this indication, this very clear benchmark, that if a country starts approaching, if its sovereign debt starts approaching the 90% of GDP level, then it is in serious trouble if it is a developing country. Japan, the debt is 260% of GDP. Nobody squeals. The investors did not stop buying Japanese bonds. So guess who's the second most bankrupt country? The United States. So in terms of debt, our debt is so manageable and it is so tiny and it is so insignificant. The only thing that we need to watch out for is that we use that debt to grow the economy and not just to have fancy lives.
Yeah, ne? And with that, economic analyst, also the editor of Economist Namibia. Thank you so much, Mr. Daniel Steinman, for, of course, coming through yet again with such an important discussion, and certainly looking forward to next week. With that said, thank you so much for tuning in and keeping it locked to the Power Station. From me, Elsa B. Timinyani. Goodbye.